Hey guys, Ash and Justin back again on the Take Me Higher couch. Today we're talking about a topic that affects everyone, myself, Just, you guys, mums, dads, mental health. Mental health, mental illness, mental fitness. To us, they mean very similar things, and we'll cover off on them. But the important part for us is for you guys to be able to share these with your groups, your networks, and your families. So to do that and to support us and to help us get this word out, please just like, share, subscribe, and spread the word. Now, getting into mental health, it's been a challenge for myself over the years. Justice had his battles, so we want to be open about that and reduce the stigmas around these things, the treatments, the diagnosis, the comparisons to other sort of sickness, injuries, and illnesses. Just.
Yeah, I want to echo your comment about kind of interacting with our stuff. You know, if people do feel that this topic especially is kind of pertinent to them, then just, please kind of interact with us on it, because we're going to be quite vulnerable today. Yeah. I think we're going to share a few things. And I mean, to be clear, you're right, it affects everybody I know, whether it's kind of on a sort of a small level on day to day with a few wobbles, or whether it's some really sort of prolonged periods of kind of, poor mental fitness, as I know you like to refer to it as. One probably topic that we might avoid is kind of the real far end of the spectrum, things around schizophrenia, bipolar, etc.
Yeah, those high end mental illnesses that we can't talk about because we've had no experience.
Yeah, and I think I think there is a way when you do know people that have got certain issues that are really at that far end to kind of like approach them and, support them. But on a day-to-day basis, I think, most of us, if you look at that bell-shaped curve, are dealing with problems around our own mental health and mental fitness.
Yeah, you talk about, I guess, the big ones, sort of the depressions, the anxieties, the ones that can almost swing from day to day. But still we don't talk to each other about them. For me personally, I've been diagnosed with depression. I've been diagnosed with PTSD. I'd argue that I probably have some level of anxiety as well, diagnosed with alcohol abuse. These are things that I'm not necessarily hiding away, but they're often hard to talk about because there is a stigma around mental health.
Yeah.
Society suggests that it's maybe a weakness, but at the end of the day, it's no difference to a broken arm, to diabetes, to a cancer diagnosis. And you look at the treatment plans for those sort of illnesses or injuries in comparison to a mental health. I take medication. I see a psychologist. I see a psychiatrist. I've sat through umpteen amounts of TMS, so transmagnetic stimulation of the brain. Much less invasive, much easier to deal with than a cancer diagnosis or a broken bone or something like that. So why don't we talk about it?
Yeah, and I've got a very long history of working in the healthcare space, and a lot of that has been in the pharmaceutical industry, a lot of that has been in the pathology industry. And one thing I've noticed with, these diagnoses that you're talking about, whether it's, rheumatoid arthritis, hepatitis, oncology, etc., they're all kind of defined very early and upfront with some sort of testing, right? And that's not something that can necessarily be done with mental health. A lot of people still have that stigma. Some people don't even recognize it in themselves. I'm just having a bad day, I'm having a bad week, and a bad week turns to a bad month. And there's this kind of dark cloud hanging over people for a really, really long time that they don't recognize until things get too bad.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you, because I'm fascinated. I've sort of sat, in on your journey over the last couple of years. And I've really seen the far end of things as you've taken those incredible steps to kind of improve your mental health and your mental fitness. But how did it all start for you? What's your story?
Great question. And I don't even know when it started. It's one of those, I think everyone experiences that you don't really see the start. You probably only see when it sort of progresses to the worst sort of higher end levels.
Yeah.
You look at depression, whether it's just the deep sadness and the avoidance of people, all the way up to the highest end of suicide. And I've experienced that whole range. So to answer your question directly, how did it start? I think it started probably post my Afghanistan deployment, but yeah, somewhere there. Significant PTSD, used alcohol to self-medicate and to try and deal with the problems, also hide the problems, allow me to sleep. All the experiences that I was having, and alcohol was my crux. So then there was some level of addiction, like I talked about, and avoiding putting my hand up and saying, yes, there's something wrong. I don't know what it is, but I probably need some professional help.
Yeah, right.
And that just seemed to accumulate and progress for nearly a decade, to the point where I was at my lowest, sitting on a cliff, considering, what do I want to do with my life? Fortunately, I have people, my son, my wife specifically, who are far too important for me to not be here anymore. So that allowed me to walk back, and the next day I went into a hospital and put my hand up and said, it's time.
That's massive, isn't it? Like an entire decade where you've got that kind of those steps towards kind of where you ended up. And you know, I mean, were there ever any points during that where you thought, hey, you know, like I should get help, or I recognize some of these signs? Or were you just kind of, like you say, masking it, blinding yourself to some of it?
Yeah, I was very aware, particularly with the PTSD side of it, because I had and I still have significant triggers that will initiate flashbacks and that sort of things. Things like, our car's now a diesel car, so as soon as I fill up with diesel, that smell takes me straight back. I tend to avoid kids' birthdays and things like that, where I know there's going to be balloons, because my anxiety spikes, because I know if one of them go bang, it remind me of being blown up.
Bloody hell.
And that flashback just initiates. So yeah, I knew through that 10 years that there was things wrong with me. I would seek others when I observe things in them and talk to them, which only sort of reinforced what I was feeling. So that was a way for me to start trying to help myself by trying to help others. But at the end of the day, it was still delaying. I needed that professional level of help to deal with these issues. My mental fitness was quite low, because I wasn't working on it. If I was that unfit in terms of my muscular endurance or cardiovascular system, then I'd go for a run or I'd go to the gym. But I was failing to do that with my mental health. My physical health was peak. Mental health was just almost non-existent.
I need to share my story because and I'll tell you why. Because your military background, and just realizing, your military background kind of puts it in that sort of movie space for me. You know, like it's like there's a Hollywood sort of attachment to it. But I lost my mum in a really tragic car accident when I was in my mid-20s, and I really struggled to talk about it, and I don't know if I'm going to kind of crack.
That's fine.
But she was an amazing woman, and she was taken far too early. And my dad was also involved in the same accident. And it was probably, I mean, at the time, 25, it was too enormous for me to understand. And I wonder if there's parallels with the actual acute thing that happened to you with, I know, that roadside bomb and things being blown up, if that kind of was almost at the time too enormous.
That's your bomb.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It is my bomb.
And I guess that analogy is that the mechanism doesn't matter. Like you say, I talk to people about what's caused me to go down and have those mental health issues. Like being blown up and stuff is so unrealistic to most people to understand, because it's just so out there. A death could be anything that causes that decline in mental health. The mechanism doesn't matter. It's the result that's the same, whether it results in depression or anxiety or anything. Whatever your coping mechanism is, whether it's alcohol or drugs or whatever that is, avoidance. It really doesn't matter what causes it. It's the mechanism that needs to be acknowledged, and then treat that cause. Yeah,
no, I agree. And I think, for me, I kind of had a bit of a combination, a cocktail of avoidance tactics, if you will. I started doing triathlon. I started doing CrossFit. I threw myself into exercise, and almost sadistic levels of training. I would try and go out and do 100-mile bike rides, often finding myself on the curbside completely low on blood sugar, bonking, they call it in cycling. But then I'd counter that with the far extreme of kind of having big nights out where, I'd lose an entire weekend. But at the time, I kind of justified it to myself, and so many parallels that I'm drawing here.
And the fitness and the work one is so common. Like, you try and avoid what is really affecting you by throwing yourself into something else. I did the same thing with work. And I was, in my opinion, I was quite successful and did quite well within my profession. But again, that came as at a detriment to my mental health, and to arguably my family, to a lot of other things. So I was very successful in one point, but that was just masking a whole lot of other things.
Were there ever any points within that work environment? I know you're saying you performed really well, but then were there ever any moments where you had wobbles in work, where you kind of felt like, oh my gosh, I can't do this?
Yeah, heaps. One that springs to mind straight away. I had one particular boss who I didn't necessarily agree with most of his decisions. I'd received an email that over the weekend, I got it on a Monday morning when I got to work, that was almost condescending in tone, questioning my competence. And I went to confront him, and I didn't know how to deal with that situation. So I went to the fight or flight, and I obviously couldn't physically assault my boss. So I had to remove myself and go and cry in the toilet, because it was just that way of getting that. I was just had so much emotion.
Yeah.
And I had no way of getting it out. And that's one of the points where I was like, well, mate, that's a pretty big red flag that you're either going to go and assault someone, or you have to go and bawl your eyes out in the toilet.
Yeah.
Yeah. But again, I still did nothing about it.
That's a moment. Yeah. Again, like you say, it's big and it's massive, but you kind of end up still burying your head in the sand.
Yeah. It is what it is. And it was another one of those points where I recognized that there was something wrong, but still continued to push on until it got right to that extreme, and that was the point. And I guess the reason for talking about this is to say to people, don't get to that point. You don't have to. Like, the treatment that's out there, the levels of treatment, which I know you have a better understanding than me, probably through your medical background. I've sort of lived it, and you've worked it in a professional capacity. Go and seek them out, whether it's very low end counseling. Like, it's very low end, even sitting on the couch with a mate. Yeah. Talking it through.
There's almost like a ladder, isn't there?
Yeah, it is.
It's like a kind of see exactly what you're talking about. And we'll probably come on to a couple of top tips in a bit, but I think you're right. It starts with talking to friends, coaching, counselling, and then going up into that sort of far end stuff which you're talking about. And I know we might even share a little clip of you getting a couple of treatments. Yeah. With the TMS, and that is getting to the higher end of treatment, but this is me, I guess, taking a stand, and us taking a stand to say it's okay not to be okay. Yeah. Mental health is the same as your physical health, the same as anything else. It can decline, and it can improve. And I think you've almost taken the words out of my mouth. I remember, I've had my own kind of, this is a hard one for me to share, but I was living in London probably about 8 or 9 years ago now. At the lowest point of my life, I was still grieving the loss of my mum. I was going through a divorce. I just moved back from Australia to London with my wife at the time, and we split up. My work was going badly. I honestly, you could almost build a tick list of things that were going crap. Yeah. I had to forfeit my rent on my lovely apartment in Richmond and go and live in North London, in basically somebody's spare room on somebody's sofa. And I remember standing on a train.
Effectively homeless.
I was effectively homeless. I didn't have a fixed abode. My family were in Wales, and I'm sure I could have kind of had a roof over my head, but I didn't have a fixed abode as such. I had, a trip to work every day that I hated. I remember standing on the train station platform one day and seeing this big fast Virgin train coming through, because it was on its way from one of the big London stations to Manchester or Birmingham. I'm thinking, my God, I could just chuck myself in front of this train now and it would all be over. Yeah. It would just be done. But I think highs come with lows, lows come with highs. Everything is temporary. And there was this kind of video that I watched ages ago that said, this too shall pass. Yeah. And I think this kind of suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. Yeah. Because look at us both here now. That's right. We've gone through some very, very low lows. but we've also had since then had some incredibly great highs and some superb experiences that, you know, have kind of galvanized that it's worth staying here.
That's right.
You know,
I look back on that particular day and think, I'm so glad that I'm still here.
Yeah.
Every day I thank that, whatever took me off that edge. My son, my wife, like I look at them and I'm like, geez, I'm lucky to still be here and to share the time that I've got with them. Because it nearly wasn't.
Yeah.
It's like I say, a very permanent answer to a temporary problem. Yes, it takes work, and it can get harder before it gets easier. But take it from me, take it from you, that the work's worthwhile. It gets better.
Yeah, I agree. I'd love to kind of share some tips, because I think we've both got some ideas on what needs to happen.
Yeah.
And, you know, for me, initially, number one, we talked about wellness practices.
Yeah.
Like daily habits, wellness practices. Have you got any that you do that you kind of find?
Look, it's taken me a long time to come around to the word wellness. For whatever reason, it just was hard to adopt for me. And I think a lot of people out there think, oh, what's a wellness practice, or why would I bother doing that? But it can be anything. You talk about the ones that sort of people roll their eyes at are breathing and yoga and those sort of things, and they work for people. I love doing breathing. I'll get on my Shakti mat, which is like a bed of nails, put on some YouTube binaural beats and do some breathing, and it just sends me into this just relaxed state that's amazing. But then you look, it could be fishing, it could be going to the gym, whatever, building model cars or planes, like whatever just takes you out of your stresses. Jiu-jitsu is a perfect one. You don't get to think about anything but the person that's trying to break your arm.
Absolutely, yeah.
So that's my first or our first tip, I think.
I think so too. And look, like to your point, it doesn't have to be lying on a bed of nails listening to deep music. Good on you. Ain't ever going to join you on that. Some people go for like these like cold plunges.
Exactly.
You know, and more credit to them.
Yeah.
I've got a swimming pool out there that's probably minus.
That's cold enough,
but I ain't going in it. For me, it's really simple stuff, and like going for a walk.
Yeah.
And I know not everybody lives in the climate where you want to get out and go for a walk, and sometimes that can be counterproductive, but actually just getting out and sort of exercising, moving. Jiu-jitsu is big for us. It's not for everybody, but to your point, I think when you're trying to protect your neck or your arm, you can't think about the minutiae. And I think there's something absolutely beautiful about switching off.
Yeah.
Like not giving yourself that option to ruminate, to think, to kind of like entertain the anxiety. So I think the wellness practice is a big one.
Yeah.
Talk and, talk about your problems.
I think that's probably the biggest one for me. I've seen it both ways. Me talking with other people and watching almost the eyes light up and them realizing they're not the only one that's going through something.
Yeah.
And then for me, like every time I do that with someone, it helps me. And every time I talk to someone about my stuff, it helps me. Like the old problem shares a problem halved. Like gets things off my chest that I'm keeping in my head. And then stepping it up to talking with a psychologist. Lou, my psychologist, is amazing. Like it took me a long time. Like, don't be afraid if you're out there and you want to seek specialist help, shop around. If you sit on the couch with a psychologist and you're like, this is garbage, we're not gelling.
Totally agree.
Go and find another one.
Totally agree.
Because I went through 4 or 5 before I found Lou.
Yeah.
And whilst that was very frustrating, I'm glad that I shopped it around.
It's such an important comment to make. It's interviewing, like, it's an investment in your future. Because after I lost my mum, I had a counsellor who kind of almost encouraged me to go, oh, well, carry on going out for drinking and these things. If you think it's working for you. And then I kind of walked away and thought, that person just told me to hit the booze.
Yeah.
And I was looking for somebody to actually say that's not really a great idea. So, and I walked away from that counselling relationship very, very quickly.
Yeah.
The other thing, like you say about talking and being open and honest in your approach is good. But I think even if you're in a good space, but you notice somebody isn't, approaching them is important.
Yeah.
but you've got to be careful
how you approach,
the approach and the lack of judgment within that approach, being able to kind of look at things and go like, actually, I don't know what, if I'm asking if somebody's okay, I've got to be prepared for the response. And I've got to be prepared to have the responsibility of then supporting them through to the next step. So if you do approach non-judgmentally with as much listening as possible. Don't chuck in a few things about your own vulnerabilities, but also don't use it as a chance to trade war stories.
100%.
Oh yeah, I feel like that.
You're not comparing traumas. All you're there is to listen to someone else's. And I would say the age-old saying, you've got two ears and one mouth.
Big time.
Use them.
Yeah.
You're not there to give advice necessarily. You're not a qualified psychologist or counselor or doctor. Just sit there and listen. And you might be advising, hey, maybe you need to speak to someone who's a bit more qualified than me. Maybe you need some more help that can't be provided.
I think that's it. And that was kind of going to be point 3 anyway, wasn't it? Is, yes, okay, you can talk to friends. Yes, okay, you can get it off your chest and make people around you aware. I think your family deserve it, you deserve it, and your friends kind of need to be aware. But it's like, if you've got a broken arm, you'll go to a doctor. Don't expect your friends to be able to fix your mental health issues.
Perfect.
Because ultimately there are treatments out there. Okay, there might not always be prescription treatments, but there might be coping mechanisms. There might be things you can do. My PTSD was around because my mum was hit by a car, and I still get it now. I'm still triggered. If I hear a car going too fast, I just it.
And especially with kids.
Totally.
Crossing the road with kids, that sort of stuff.
I get angry. And I still need to kind of but none of us are perfect. I probably need to get back into a bit of professional help. So if you're listening,
that's right.
Let's hold me accountable on some of that. Point number 4 we talked about was, I know it's a bit simple, but do things that fill up your cup. I know we're talking about the wellness practices, and I think that is good on those daily basis to have those micro habits, but get a bloody hobby. Don't be, and we've talked about it in previous talks, but don't be there for everybody else but not yourself. You can't help others, you can't pour into others' cups if yours is empty. And that's the way I look at it. It's almost, we've talked about it before, but be selfish. I can't help you if I'm down in the dumps myself, so I'm going to do stuff, be selfish, do stuff that makes me feel good, and I can help make you feel good. Absolutely. And this might be controversial, but if you do have those sort of toxic relationships where somebody's not happy with you kind of looking after yourself, or you feel that there's some sort of guilt around you, taking care of your own mental health, there's a red flag there. You have to take care of your own mental health. You have to have hobbies. You have to carve out time in your week to be able to take a knee. Now, we're both husbands and parents, and that comes with a lot of responsibility. From the second you wake up to the second you go to bed, there's times when you actually probably need to step away, do some things yourself. I was speaking to a friend, you don't know who it is, I won't say on camera, but a joint friend of ours the other day who said a couple of months ago, he took himself away for 3 nights, said to his wife, look, I'm just overstimulated. I'm touched out.
I've had a conversation with the same person.
Okay. And it really, really worked for them. And his wife did exactly the same thing, and they've both come back refreshed.
And how responsible is that? Saying, babe, I got to tap out for a couple of days. Are you good to take the kids? And then when I'm back, over to you. Go
Absolutely.
And have some time to yourself. What a great conversation and relationship they have to be able to communicate that and say, it's not you, it's not the kids, it's a combination of work and life and you guys, but I got to get out for a couple of days.
Absolutely. And how much better is that than just having a mental breakdown and disappearing for a month and being found in Mount Isa sleeping out the back of your car. It's recognizing those early signs and saying, but I've got to fill up the cup.
Such a healthy way, instead of exactly that, going and have a bender of a weekend, which I'm so guilty of. I can't even think how many times I've done that, saying, well, this will fix everything. And you just wake up with a wicked hangover on Monday morning and worried that you're going to get a breath test or a drug test or something along those lines and just compound the problems.
Absolutely,
I celebrate those sort of ideas of take yourself out for a couple of days. Chill out.
Completely agree.
I did want to mention, I've had a couple of conversations with some former colleagues recently. One of them was him opening up in not an emotional way, just a conversation about some antidepressants that he'd been taking for 10 years and had never told anyone because of the stigma. And the conversation we had, and it was quite open with it, and we discussed a whole lot of stuff, but I was really proud of him for making that step of saying, hey, well, yeah, I'm taking this, and I've recently lowered it for a couple of other reasons. He's doing some wellness practices and taking himself back.
Wow.
So that was a really great conversation. And then another one with another former colleague talking about how he's been going with his family and specifically his wife, and just a really great conversation where it was free flowing. There was no holding back. There was no embarrassment or I'm worried about what they're going to say because this is a little bit out there. So that's what I talk about, being there to hold the space for people to open up.
Mm-hmm.
Don't be judgmental. Just sit there and listen. And it's amazing. You'll actually have better relationships with these people. Your friendships will grow, and they'll be there for you when you need them.
Yeah, absolutely. The medication one is for me a very interesting one. You know, I've got friends and family who have taken and do take antidepressants, something that I've never done, something that I considered, and probably, if you think about it, over the years I might have been a perfect candidate for it, but I've always tried, rightly or wrongly, to self manage. I'm not against antidepressants.
Do you think that's due to the stigma?
Well, that's a really big question. I think it probably is.
Yeah.
I think it probably is. I don't. Yeah.
What would you do for blood pressure?
Take a blood pressure.
Exactly. And that's exactly the point, isn't it?
Yeah,
and that's why I say, like, I'm on a fairly high dose of sertraline. I don't care. I'll get that out to people. Make your judgments if you want to, but it keeps me happy, keeps me productive, keeps me showing up for you, for my family, for my friends. If that's what I need to do, then I'm happy with that.
No, absolutely agree. And again, sertraline, we're not going to go too deep into that, but it seems to be a common one that really does give people, especially with things like anxiety, PTSD, that chance to kind of take it down. So I mean, like you're saying, why wouldn't you?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, big topic. I saw a few little.
There was a bit welling up there. It's definitely not easy stuff to talk about, but I think it's very important, very beneficial.
Agree. Thanks, Ash.
Thank you, mate.